Today, we do our very first live roster review. We break down for you how we evaluate when and how long we need to rebuild, when we should start contending, what types of moves we're looking to make based on this, how we evaluate a league. So, while this should be very useful for the player we're doing the roster review for, hopefully you guys can take away a lot about our process and how to apply it in your leagues. Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Down Construction Podcast. Very excited here to be doing a roster review from one of our commenters from our one of our last YouTube videos. Had a little competition giveaway. Only had few commenters on it. Appreciate those of you who did. So this is our first roster review we're doing live here. So just want to be very honest, like we would love any feedback you guys have on our process, anything we have to improve. We definitely know how to put together some decent rosters. So I think we can do a pretty good job at this, but we also know, like every other show we've ever done, we can always improve. So really appreciate in the comments anything you like, would like to see different in the future, etc. Anytime you disagree with us, that's also okay. You're wrong, but it's okay. No, just kidding. We are as wrong as often as you know 42% of the time or so, which means we're right 58% of the time. So it's pretty good, possibly. I don't have any way to back this statistic up. Anyways, that being said, we're going to hop right in to friend of the show, Chris B. Quinn. Going to put the roster up on the screen before we hop into actually deep diving on this. JP, can you give us the league settings that we might want to consider as we're looking over his team here?
Yeah, league settings is one of the best places to start. It's very, very important when you're looking at a roster. And we have a start 11, so you got a lot of starters. It is super flex. It's 6 point passing touchdown. You got 0.25 points for each first down for the skill position players. That's running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And we got a two tight end premium.
Now, he did want to know, because I did kind of a little interview with him just on what he's looking to get out of this, how much of a concern we have about these scoring settings. So I'm just going to talk about the points per first down. I think I play in more points per first down leagues than either of you guys do. And typically, what I've found with this, and when I have managed to look at some warp charts for it, is it's most pronounced, and this is not a shock at all, right? With the big volume players, right? So the few running backs that are truly every down running backs, the Bijan Robinsons, Kyron Williams type of guys who are getting all that work and therefore have a higher chance of getting first downs. Guys in good offenses have a higher chance of getting first downs. Big shocker. So as much as you can predict who's going to be in a good offense year over year in Dynasty, something to keep an eye on, but volume is probably a lot bigger of the play. So for wide receivers, the Amon-Ra St. Brown chain mover types, Adam Thielen this year in the playoffs, like guys like chain movers are good to keep an eye on. But once you get down too far in the totem pole, you don't really want to consider it too much because the fact of the matter is, dynasty value is kind of dynasty value. It's not just production, right? So once you get past a certain threshold of like maybe it bumps up the elite a little bit, we're going to kind of advise not to care too much about it as far as that goes. Moving on to our next little bit, David, can you start talk a little bit about what we care about the number of starters as well as the passing touchdown points?
Yeah, I think we'll start with the start 11. That's pretty important. That's one of the first things I think we all should look at. I assume most of you know, but if not, just to fill you in, start 11 refers to how many starters you have that are not kicker or defense. In a typical 12-team league, I think you guys would agree, probably start 10 is about like the middle. Anything below that, so start 8, start 9, or really focusing on the high end players. You definitely want to consolidate value in those settings. Start 11, 12, or more. Depth definitely matters a lot more just because you have so many more starting spots. So, this being a start 11, we do care about our depth. We obviously still want some high end players, but you can't necessarily just consolidate if you're not asset rich. So that's the biggest thing for me. Real quick, we'll just talk about 6-point passing touchdown versus 4-point. I don't care that much, if I'm being honest. I probably should care a little more. But either way, I value the position very highly. Either way, I still like rushing upside. I do think maybe it matters when you get into like that middle tier of quarterbacks, your Goffs and Bakers and such. So if you don't have two elite quarterbacks, it probably matters a little more. That to me is not as important as the other settings we're looking at here.
Yeah, quarterbacks definitely score a lot more points, even in a 4-point format. They're scoring more points than the other positions on average, but 6-point even more so. Yeah, two tight end premium. I mean, that's huge. And this guy in particular, Crispy Quinn, said that they do value tight ends fairly highly, so they have adjusted, which is can't take as much advantage there. But I mean, still, I think that you can take advantage of it a little bit there because I don't think you realize just how many points you do score in a two tight end premium. It makes tight ends much more flex worthy, especially in a start 11 where you do need a lot of starters. But I mean, just looking at two tight end premium, I mean, Travis Kelsey, he's tight end five. And the guy, if he was playing wide receiver, he'd be about wide receiver four. He's tight end five. So yeah, tight ends score a ton of points. And sure, the value isn't quite there. In a starter draft, the wide receivers are still going to go earlier typically, unless it's a guy like Brock Bowers who is insanely talented. But yeah, I think you can exploit that a little bit because if you have one of those top five tight ends, then you're going to get a lot of points. But sometimes you don't know who it is. Like we thought Sam Laporta was going to be that guy, and he hasn't been. But I mean, that's the game with any position that you can go up or down. But tight ends, yeah, you could probably get a little bit of an edge there, even if they are valuing them higher than normal.
Why do you got to bring up Sam Laporta, man? Come on, it hurts. Anyways, no, I definitely agree there. It's important to keep in mind, but looks like the league is valuing it appropriately. All right, so before we actually read out the assets we care about, David, can you read the listener's self assessment he turned into us about how he feels about his team, timeline, assets, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. So strength draft capital says though in hindsight I would have tried for a more even spread between 25 and 26. Quarterback Bryce Young is a fine QB 2 or 3, but he's my best QB asset for now. Watson and Carr can't be relied upon. Running back needs a lot of work. I thought corn would be more of a thing. We'll be patient here unless value is there in the rookie draft. Wide receiver BTJ isn't a bad foundational player. Not deep, but Devonta Smith and Judy give me something to work with. Tight end Hawkinson and not much else. Depth is an issue here, and 1 point tight end premium no less. And he says, for what it's worth, his team name is Project 2027. I think the first thing he brought up is draft capital split. I think we'll talk about maybe some ways to adjust that and fix that wrong. I do agree quarterback was probably the first thing that stood out to me is what he needs to address. Definitely some other things to work on, but good place to start. So JP, you want to go ahead and read off some of these key assets that we've kind of been alluding to?
Yeah, and I'll go position by position here. At quarterback, he has Bryce Young and Jameis Winston and Derek Carr, or what if he is QB 2 and 3. So, like you said, a little weaker at quarterback right now, but we can always make improvements. At running back, we got Tank Bigsby, Blake Corum, and Marshawn Lloyd. I don't hate being super thin in a rebuild at running back. Maybe want some more depth. We'll expand more on that. At wide receiver, we got BTJ, Devonta Smith, Jerry Judy, Chris Godwin, and Romeo Dobbs.
I think you missed Luke McCaffrey there, JP. I'm not willing to move on yet, even though I know I should, okay?
Oh, yeah, I guess he's on the roster, you're right. And at tight end, we have TJ Hawkinson, Cole Kmet, Will Disley, Noah Fant, and Cade Stover. And, maybe he can be an asset in two tight end premium. But the real wealth with this roster comes with the picks. We got 103, 104, 106, another undecided playoff first at the time of this recording. The 203, 204, and three other seconds 301 as well, 304, and five other thirds. So we got a lot of picks, and we have two extra thirds in the 2026 draft. David, what are your immediate thoughts when you're looking at the key assets on this roster?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really jumps out to me is that quarterback room. I like to build through my quarterback room, and right now I would feel comfortable with Bryce Young at QB 3. So that means there's really two holes before I'm ready to think that I'm competing. So we'll break this down a little further and talk about some moves you would make there, but that would be my first emphasis and the thing that I would be saving up my assets to do.
I agree. The QB room, screaming issue there, of course. I first think when I look at this, it's just not something that I want to be contending next year with this roster. You can squint and say, hey, I buy Tua off somebody who's scared and another quarterback, plug up the holes, spend a couple of my seconds on running backs people don't want, and maybe buy a hammer somewhere else. And I can be competing next year and maybe even still have like a first or so to spend on a young player. But I think that if we look to go that direction, then I'm just going to wind up probably being a pretty mediocre team. Might be able to make the playoffs, probably not going to get a bye. And that's just never really the direction that I want to go is to spend all of my assets. Like I've already done all this work accumulating these assets. I don't want to just like push the chips in too early, right? I think what David was saying is if I had those QBs already, then yeah, sure, let's push that's when I'm willing to buy those RBs for those second. They're like, can Aaron Jones do it again for another team next year? It's the 211. I'm willing to maybe try that, right? Like that type of a move. Ramondre for a mid to late second as well. And now I have a cheap running back room, but with the quarterback room, my immediate thoughts are I don't know if it's Project 2027 like his team name was, but my immediate thoughts are I'm probably going to name it Project 2026 and really have that as my goal and then have getting points off of my roster. Not all of them, but at least some. My goal with this team is I mean, I've never opposed to getting the 101, but I think with some of the pieces on this team, I'm not with the Brian Thomas that I want to keep, and I'd like to try to draft some rookies this year. I don't know that I'm, needing to get the 101, but I certainly want a top 3 pick next year. Not going to sell my cornerstones to move the pick up, but certainly will sell other pieces that we will probably discuss who we'll want to sell shortly. JP, any additional immediate reactions?
Yeah, I mean, you never really want to rebuild for 3 years. So I agree. 2026 is probably the target that I would have, and he doesn't have a ton of 2026 picks. So I think with rookie fever coming in the next couple of months, the picks that he has this year can roll over probably fairly easy. When everybody's trying to get their hands on rookies to the 2026 picks. And I agree with David. We got two holes at quarterback. So I definitely want to address that because we know quarterbacks, they last a long time, especially high end guys. So those would be the things I'd be looking at when I first see this roster and the key assets.
All right, I think we're all kind of in some consensus here then. So now let's kind of narrow in a little bit. So we've already talked that this direction of this team, it's not looking to compete for next year. One of the very first things JP brought up was just kind of the roster construction from a max points for standpoint. And JP, walk our audience through a little bit of just like what was your very first thought when you saw this wide receiver and tight end room and heard he does not have the 101?
Yeah, I mean, between the wide receiver and tight end position, we got 21 total players. And in a start 11, I mean, those positions, they could catch a touchdown any week, have a boom week here and there, especially the tight end, two tight end premium. So yeah, I would probably try to thin out at the back end. So guys like De'Ami Brown, Ryan Flournoy, Kadarius Tony, Peyton Hendershot, even Tyler Conklin, I try to either cut maybe some of the tight ends you can move for picks potentially, but I wouldn't be opposed to cutting them if I had to make room for rookies because they can hurt that max points for when you got ten tight ends and a two tight end premium. So yeah, like you said, the goal is a top three rookie pick doesn't have to be 101 necessarily. That would be nice, and if we can get it, then we should.
And the tight ends are not the reason not to get the 101. Those are gone in a heartbeat if I'm in a points for a race for the 101.
Yeah, no, those back end tight ends, they're not going to rise a whole lot in value for the most part. Most of them, I mean, Conklin's really, I really don't see him rising up a whole lot. Maybe Stover has a path to climb up, but even like Dawson Knox, Colby Parkinson, you might be able to get a fourth for them or something. So I would just try to move on for sure because I mean you have three flex guys. You got a tight end, you got three flexes. I mean, those tight ends could be filling those up every week, giving you somewhere close to double digit points. I mean, you need four catches for 50 yards, and you're at 13 fantasy points from a tight end. So, yeah, I would try to trim the fat there first and foremost.
And he did mention when I asked him that typically speaking, you are able to try to sell quarterbacks once they get a starting job. Like Mac Jones has not been sold in this league, but he had an offer of a late second for Jameis Winston, saw Isaac Garendo get moved, when he got his job. So at least have a chance to. So since the league is willing to buy, listen to, make offers on those guys, even if you end up just having to try to sell them for another injured or a backup that you like better if you can't get a draft pick, whatever, because you maybe don't want the max points on your roster. But I think we would definitely recommend for him trying to do with some of those. Say we cut 6 or 7 of those wide receiver and tight end spots, pouring those into either backup quarterback or backup running backs that should give a zero every week. That if they get the job, we could try to sell for more assets. Although he might own most of the assets already. Now, moving on from that meta strategy, just of how we would try to kind of construct the roster, some changes around the edges, some players we're willing to cut, we're going to start looking at general direction we're looking to make. So, I think probably a first and good place to start that conversation is how are we going to try to fix this quarterback room? So, before we go into that, I'm just going to read some information he gave me, guys. Most active traders from the league are Cagresto, Dankins 91, Icy, CPAP Star. I hope he doesn't need a CPAP. 17 and Grainy Bro 831. So let's go ahead and look at some of these teams here. So right off the bat, the most active trader, Cagresto 919 right here. David, what was your first thought when you saw this roster right here, this 1 in 27 stinker?
Yeah, honestly, it's not a terrible team. He's doing a pretty good job for a productive struggle. My first thought though is does this guy want to compete in 26 or 27? I want to figure that out. And I want to try to make something happen between us that pushes us both in the direction we want to head. If he's trying to wait, or I'm sorry, 25 or 26, not 26 or 27. um, but yeah, if he wants to compete next year, maybe try to get some of that 26 capital from him for your 25 capital. Maybe try to sell him like a Jerry Judy or something if you can. Try to give him some of those pieces to load up. If not, I know we keep saying this is a 26 team, but if you can get lucky on a couple of hits and you can hit on a draft pick, you can probably compete in 25, maybe see what Patrick Mahomes is going to cost. People are a little down on him. I know he's kind of had a down year, but hey, he's Patrick Mahomes. He would definitely be the quarterback one on this roster for Chris. I don't know that I would be willing to pay the package that, the same price we were a year ago, but you probably get him cheap. And, if not, like I said, that 26 capital is something that you could maybe even out with him a little bit too.
Any interest in paying the 106 for Trevor Lawrence in this draft class?
Uh, I think I'd rather try to do something else with it.
But the playoff first and 1 or 2 seconds, is that something you're willing to consider?
I would consider it. Yeah, I mean, I, I just don't think that his price is going to go up much from here. So I think you can be patient on that move.
All right. Don't necessarily disagree there. Next team on the more active traders he mentioned, I see here. JP, we were looking at this one earlier. QB room of Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix. This is a contending team with a young quarterback room. probably hard to see a lot of logical matches here. But anything that you see right off the top of your head, you'd be looking to do directional wise here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always worth inquiring what the price of an elite wide receiver is. I mean, I think that's a hole on this team that he's going to address at some point. So, I mean, if Amon-Ra St. Brown, if he can get him for a price that isn't too bad, I mean, generally we say three random first. I mean, if you can get him for the 104 and 106, maybe with rookie fever, I think I'd probably prefer Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then you know that you have an elite asset. The quarterbacks I might inquire on because this draft class, I mean, the QB1's probably going to be at 103, 104, which he has both picks. At this point, I mean, I might prefer Bo Nix to the 104, and with rookie fever, let's see, let's just offer that on the table and see like, okay, do you want to re-roll? Maybe they want to get a running back because they feel good about Michael Penix or Justin Fields because they got four interesting guys there realistically. But yeah, so I would inquire on a quarterback or Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think you mentioned in talks that Michael Penix might be interesting to you, Justin.
Yeah, I'd be interested in Michael Penix. So, don't know if we mentioned this. There is a weird trade deadline in this league, first of all, where teams that are out of the playoffs can trade with teams that are out of the playoffs, and teams that are in the playoffs can trade with teams that are in the playoffs. I hate this. It's like, what if we take everybody you'd want to trade with and say you can't trade with them? You can only trade with the people who want the same thing as you. But, anyways, I just work here. Um, but I do wanna kinda push back on looking at, like, an Amon-Ra St. Brown on a team that I think if we consolidate 2 of those top tier assets, we're gonna struggle to compete this year, and I think if we're not competing this year, I don't think I wanna look at really consolidating assets. That being said, if you can get a heck of a deal like that, I guess it's worth doing it. If it's like we're talking like a 104, 106, I doubt you could get that done. Because then in season, you should hopefully be able to get a bigger haul than what you just got. But I do think just looking at the asset haul we've seen here so far from his team, do we feel like we want to consolidate any assets at this point, guys? Or do you think at this point that like consolidating too many assets is because when we look at starters in a start 11, we have one, two, three, Godwin's probably four, Bryce Young, if we're stretching it, is five. Let's say somehow one of these running backs hits, probably doesn't. So five. Then we have one, two, three firsts is eight. A late first is nine. We have some seconds we can try to get a starter with, I guess. But do we feel like we're ready to be consolidating assets, or how would you kind of approach that at this point? I'll start with David first here.
Yeah, I typically would agree with what you're saying, Justin. I don't think the goal should be to consolidate. I do think at the price point JP mentioned, I you pretty much have to say yes. Like Amon-Ra is going to hold his value, and you know what? Rookie fever season can get the best of people, so I don't think it's out of the question. I do think most Amon-Ra managers will say no to that pretty quickly, but you never know. You might get lucky. You might have that guy. I've found the best time to buy hammers is leading right into rookie, draft season. That's when I've gotten most of my Chase shares, most of my Lamars that I've traded for, most of my Allens that I've traded for, and that's when you get the best deals, in my opinion. So seek them out, but don't go out of your way to consolidate, and don't pay full price to consolidate right now.
Yeah, I just always like to inquire on the elite wide receiver, and that's probably a move I'm doing if I'm not trying to compete in 2025. If it's in 2026, because when people in season next year, then you could sell him for I would think more. Especially when you get a gut like a spike week or something, you get a 30-40 point week from a guy like that, then usually you can get something closer to the evaluation of three first, and that's kind of what I was thinking, just with the rookie fever talk. Just like you said, Davis, some people it just gets the best of them. Some people they value those picks really highly in February through April time. So yeah, you never know.
And moving on to the next most active team that he kind of named for us, we're going to look at CPAP C Star. This team is 22-6, so a playoff team. Quarterback room: Lamar, JJ, Dak, and Gino. He did mention that JJ is on the trade block. possibly because that team needed wide receiver help, which he can't offer during the playoff stretch. But with a quarterback room including Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, Jawan Jennings, and although he does have 125 first, this guy needs wide receivers. I thought we could probably look at some different construction deals we might be interested in making to make an offer either for JJ, for Dak if he's willing to move him when he's injured, although probably less interested now that the offseason's here. So I guess first of all, David and JP, I'm gonna ask you guys, do we have is JJ still with the, they're saying they're considering a Sam Darnold extension, but we're not looking to compete till 26. Is JJ still a buy for us? And is a playoff first this year something that we're still willing to consider paying for him?
I do think you should inquire on him, especially if this manager has, tried to trade him and you think there's a possibility to get a deal there. I think a late first is probably about the most I would consider paying just because we don't know what's going on with Darnold right now. I think looking at this guy's roster, whether it's JJ McCarthy or even potentially this 26 first, I might see if he's interested in Devonta Smith. I think if you wait till closer to the season and Chris Godwin's healthy, maybe you can work something out that way too. But this guy definitely needs receiver help. So if you could get to him first, then I think you might be interested in Devonta Smith and you might be able to get a pretty good return there.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, he's got some good tight ends and good quarterbacks, which in this scoring format is really important. But he really is hurting at wide receiver and running back. So this is a team that I see. He's got some decent pieces at running back. It's nothing I'm like super excited about, but I think if you do get that 26 first, it has a chance of missing the playoffs. So I would be interested if he does want to compete. Yeah, with your question about JJ McCarthy is, I mean, even if they do extend Sam Darnold, you have a top 10 pick. If that quarterback starts to struggle, we're seeing with Kirk Cousins, they don't care. They'll put the guy in there, if the quarterback is struggling. So I think when you've invested that much into that position, they're probably not going to wait too long. I mean, they with Jordan Love was it 3 years, David, or 4? It was
Yeah, he's
three
set for
years.
3.
3 years, and the only reason it lasted that long is because Aaron Rodgers had 2 back-to-back MVP seasons, so they kind of forced their hand. So it really is hard to see them wait too long. So I still would bet a playoff first in this draft class on JJ McCarthy. But yeah, I'm pretty interested in that 26 first or even the 26 second if he does want to compete this year.
All right. I think the way I would try to go about it personally is, I mean, if I can get Godwin and a late second for JJ, I'd be like trying to inquire something along those lines. I would also love to go Judy and a mid second, just see if he has any interest in Judy. But I would love to try to make something work with my wide receiver room, those younger wide receiver assets that I have, and this guy's QB room. I'd also love to try to sell this guy Romeo Dobbs and a third for a 26 second if I could, something along those lines, or his 25 second as well. See if I can get my way to help this guy's wide receiver room at all. So definitely something to inquire about once you are able to trade with him when he's out of the league. And the last heavily active guy he named here, Grainy Bros, right here, 25-3, contender with a questionable QB room. Tua, Levis, Aaron Rodgers. This is a team, when I look at it, one of my first thoughts, the wide receiver room, Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, Debo Samuels. Tight ends, he's got Tucker Kraft as his tight end one. RB room, a lot of age. Henry, Mixon, Monty, Williams, Brown. My first thought is I'd love to try to sell Bryce Young for this guy's 26 first and just go for the 101. Are you adding a second to Bryce Young to get to this guy's 26 first? If it's a mid to late?
Yeah, I would do that. I think something that stands out to me is, can I get Marv for cheap? People are kinda down on him. Also, this guy's traded his 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in 25, but nothing beyond that. So I'm not sure if he would trade his 27 picks, but I'm not too interested in that. It sounds to me like he's willing to trade his 26 picks though. So if if I get that 26 first or Marv, then I'm pretty interested.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Marv because I think we probably agree that there's probably brighter days ahead for Marv.
Would you do BTJ in one of your 25 seconds for Marv and his 26 first? I would like to keep BTJ and add Marv, but if that was the deal and you're allowed to get both of the assets we're talking about on this team, is that worth it to you guys?
I don't know that the market sentiment is fully there. It maybe should be, but I think most people who have Marv drafted Marv so far ahead of BTJ and just assume that he's going to figure it out because of who he is as the talent.
Yeah, but I mean, if we're adding in the 25, what he had the 203, so the 25 203 for 26 first that he is gonna assume is a playoff first. I don't know. I understand what you're saying, and you might be right. Most people would just take Marv straight up, but I think there's enough hype and enough people that see what BTJ has done this year that you might be able to get a plus.
Yeah, I think with that plus, I mean, yeah, I'd broach that as a topic. It's an interesting trade construction. I would
Maybe Devonta Smith or Chris Godwin and adding to them to get to Marv would be the route that I would go.
Like any amounts of those seconds and thirds, pretty much. Or
follow.
I mean, I'd probably do Chris Godwin in the playoff first, honestly, for Marv.
Yeah, of course you would. So would I. I'm not sure that that's getting done, um, but certainly willing to make an inquiry. I'd be willing to offer the 106 and the playoff first. I'd still happily for Marv. I think when we get up to like talking about that Amon Ra price of 104, 106, I don't think I'm willing to consolidate assets like that for a Marv. But certainly an interesting player to acquire on, David. Good one to bring up. And just going to go ahead and moving back up to look at the roster. Are there any players? I think we've already mentioned a few, but anybody that we just absolutely want to make sure we are getting off of this roster right off of the back?
Primarily the wide receivers. I mean, the tight ends. There's not many. You're not getting a whole lot for those. But yeah, I mean, it would be if I'm not competing this year, I'd probably try to move Chris Godwin, Dobbs, Judy. Those are the three guys for sure.
yeah, I mean, I'm not really in a rush though. We don't have anything that it matters for this team as far as competing until at least what, next September. So you've really only got the draft to worry about. Build up to the draft where the draft type season is. You want to do some stuff with your picks, but be patient. If you can't address quarterback this year, just make sure you store up the assets to address it next year. If you get a really good offer at quarterback and you think you can now turn this roster into a competitor and you want to, go for it. But patience is really important. I think for this stretch, we're all going to get antsy to make moves, but there's several months before any of this matters. So definitely don't jump at the first opportunity unless it's right.
Yeah, you don't need to be patient if you get a deal that is a no-brainer. That is for sure. And then looking at other potential solutions for the QB room as we go through roster to roster, this is a startup that happened this year. Most teams have 2 to 3 quarterbacks. There's no teams with 4, 5, 6 really, besides just one that we've already looked at, the guy with JJ McCarthy. So, probably kind of what David brought up earlier is just having conversations with everybody who has a quarterback that you view as a possible solution. Whether it's the Anthony Richardson owner down here, if you believe CJ Stroud and Kyler Murray having down years, reaching out to those managers and just seeing what their prices are on them. If you can get those guys for around 3 mid to late first prices, I think it's still probably fair to pay, although I'm less excited about them than we were 8 months ago. But just prying in on the prices on all of these quarterbacks, seeing if they have a need, and just having conversations with every single of these quarterback rooms. We see some really good ones: Herbert, Love, Burrow, Hurts. You could take a shot on Sam Darnold on this team here if you want. DPYLE has Burrow, Hurts, and then Darnold. Might be able to pry Darnold off of them if you want to take a shot before he gets a contract extension and a contract somewhere else.
I wonder in that scenario if Darnold gets the extension, if then you're able to potentially pry away like a Joe Burrow.
Certainly not if you don't ask. So, again, that point David brought up about making sure you ask, have those conversations, because, yeah, that is a definite buying window for one of the quarterbacks on this team potentially. And one other question our friend had for us here was, with all of these picks, is he going to want to try to roll some of these picks forward? And how are we going to go about that? I see David nodding, so you're saying yes, but can you kind of speak on how you would approach that, David?
Yeah, I think, again, you need to be patient here. I've had the most success like right before or during the draft with rolling picks over. You got the 208 and someone's like, "Man, I valued this guy's an early second. He's sitting there at 208." You say, "I'll take your 26 second for my 208." Typically, that's a pretty good move. It doesn't always work out, but those are things we like to do. That playoff first, if you can get a 26 first for it, probably going to be a good move. Even that, what do we have, the 106? If you can get a 26 first and maybe a little plus back, that might not be a bad idea. I also don't mind buying things with your picks and then trying to sell some of these, like Devonta Smith for a 26 first, like we talked about. Maybe you can get something for Hawkinson, in that neighborhood, and then try to hit on some of these rookies. So you don't necessarily have to just do one for one across the board, 25 pick for 26 pick, but that's not an uncommon thing to see happen in drafts. And I don't mind adding thirds to seconds, or first or whatever. Thirds they're nice to have, but I value them more in their buying power than their drafting power. And you're not really looking to buy points right now. So if I can avoid making as many of those thirds and pushing them out for future stable assets, that's what I'm going to try to do.
Or conversely, pushing them in with the 203 and 204 to try to get up wherever we see that tier break, right? You can be very patient with this, right? We're not going to know when that tier break is. Of course, right now, if you could take the 203 and a playoff second and a playoff third and get a late first, we're going to do that, right? Get the playoff first, right? We're gonna pay to move up to like the 110. We're gonna pay a little bit because we can assume that there's going to be a tier break there. So like we're already willing to like do that type of thing. But you can also wait because like unless the deals are there, a lot of people are like, oh, I want to see who's there. I want to see this, right? But if a team only has a single first, right? And we do see in Dynasty Daddy, there are some teams that have a first that have no other picks till the fourth round. One of the more active teams that he talked about, right? So that team might be, willing to move back a little bit and pick up some extra shots in the rounds that seem to matter a little bit more. So something to like keep in mind is also like consolidating some of these assets. Well, we said we don't want to consolidate assets earlier. We were talking about the firsts and the meaningful assets, right? But when we get into the assets late seconds and thirds, they're valuable, but they're valuable for what they can do for your team. And turning a 203, 204 into a asset that we expect to have a substantial bit more value is definitely a direction we'd look to take. If you can take three thirds into a second when you have like 15 picks in this draft, like definitely willing to do that. Or like David said, rolling them over as well. Do you guys see any other general meaningful advice you think we are missing for our friend Chris here? Or do you guys feel like we have given enough insight into our process, directions we're looking to move, potential conversations to have with other managers, and potential moves to make during the draft season at this point?
I mean, I guess we could spend a few minutes talking about what we might look to spend our firsts on if we're going to hang on a draft with them. We have what, the three, four, six, and a playoff first. So if we assume JNT goes one, Ted McMillan goes two, you're probably looking at the quarterback one potentially. If Travis Hunter's a wide receiver, maybe Travis Hunter. I don't know that I would want to take Shador and Cam Ward with those two picks and just hope for the best, but at least then you would have some excitement and some upside in your quarterback room. And if one hits, you're okay with that. If both of them hit, though, you're probably one of the better teams going into 26 at that point. So I don't hate doing that, but I would rather trade for one and draft one if possible. And then I'm taking receivers with the other places if I can. A lot of running back value in this class. So trying to maneuver to the right spots of the draft to get good wide receiver values so that you're not loading up your running back room for next year. I think that's probably what I'm looking to do if I'm making these picks. JP, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if the consensus 103, 104 tends is going to be the RB2 in the class, they get a sexy landing spots and Almere and Hampton. I'd probably try to trade back at that point. And to your point about the quarterbacks, I mean, we want to invest in quarterback, wide receiver, even get a guy like Tyler Warren in this draft class. But honestly, like the 103, 104, I wouldn't mind sending those both out and getting a Drake May and a Bo Nix. I might prefer that than taking the prospects in this class because I think the quarterbacks are going to be pushed up in this class, but I don't think they're all that worthy based on their prospect profiles. But we're going to dive deeper into them and learn more about them. But I'd rather get a guy who's a little bit more proven. We've seen some stuff from.
And unlike a Drake May, the guy knows how to play football. Like I think he's the real deal. Is gonna if they ever got an offensive line or a single wide receiver that was actually useful there.
We add in our playoff first to the 103 for May, if that's what it takes.
I don't know that I would, but I'm certainly adding the 203 and later second to the 103 for me. The playoff first, I probably should. Yeah, yeah. I would be upset about it. Is that okay?
Sure.
But I would certainly trying to piecemeal together. I have 15 picks, right? And then if they say no to the 203 and the 211, then I'm adding on the two-thirds to it first, like before I get to a playoff first, right? Like I want to keep the assets that I feel like are cornerstone potential assets and try to move the other assets. If it's possible to move a cornerstone asset and a bunch of ancillary assets for a cornerstone asset I feel good about, that's the direction I really want to go. But if I have to, I would trade the 103. And as long as it's not the 109, I like if it's the 110, 11, 12, I would be willing to move that. I'd probably push for a third back or something. I need more thirds. I only have 8 thirds the next 2 years.
Yeah, I guess you could use that as a way to swap some 25 capital for 26 capital too.
Definitely so. Yeah, when you're trading a player away, I mean, if it's like a Dobbs and a third, and you get a 2026 second, that could be a way you do it. But yeah, no, I would love to get like a Drake May, and maybe you can then take a shot on like a Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy, and hopefully they hit as your QB two. I might prefer that to taking a shot on one of the quarterbacks in this class. Maybe you also spend a third rounder on a quarterback in this draft class as well. Just give yourself a couple of shots at the position.
Yeah, I will say, like, just from my process of like what I've like been evaluating, just in like what seems to be the reasons quarterbacks hit that we think have potential. It's typically speaking situation as much as it is like what we perceive as talent, right? CJ Stroud happened to have, Slowak as a good coordinator with Nico Collins and Tank Dell as a solid wide receiver, although not as good as we thought he was his rookie year. We saw Jordan Love, amazing coaching staff. Sam Darnold this year, great coaching staff, great weapons. So I do think like I like the opportunities of Penix and I like the opportunities of McCarthy here. And so I am very interested in if my quarterback room going into next year was Bryce Young, Penix, and McCarthy, if I could find a way to get that without having to give up the 106-4-3 and still be able to make those picks or trade those picks for other things, I'd be very ecstatic about the upside of that room, hoping that two out of those three manage to actually become solid quarterbacks. I do think that budget way of building the quarterback room out, budget, like those guys are all probably costing you approximately a first. You can hope you can trade the playoff first 203, 204, and get those two guys, maybe adding some thirds to it or something. But That's something I'd be very interested in entertaining, trying to get that specific quarterback room just because I think it's fun and it lines up pretty nicely with the 26 contending window, I think.
Yeah, even if you added those guys, I still wouldn't even hate adding Drake May, honestly, because if you have a surplus of quarterbacks, it's not a bad thing, especially when you're trying to limit your max points for. If you're consolidated to quarterback, it's not the worst thing in the world because you got two spots and they could explode. But if you got 4 or 5 starting quarterbacks, then only two of them are scoring points.
Don't hate it at all. And David, who are we picking with these third round picks? I'm just kidding.
We'll find out. Stay tuned for all that and more.